Today I'm going to be discussing cultural and societal aging by comparing two different cultures, the American and the Korean cultures. Discussing two very different cultures on aging, such as the American and Korean cultures, are like looking at opposite ends of the spectrum, and that each culture has its own nuances and traditions. While our American culture is maintaining youthfulness, the Korean culture is driven by Confucian principles. The Eastern culture is steeped in tradition, and in Korea it's their way of life. They base their culture on those principles of Confucianism. There are 6 principles in all, but they use and commonly live by the first 2, Gen and Lee. Gen translates to mean humanity, and Lee is all about gaining. The gaining for Koreans is not material items, it's what they can gain from an individual or people they encounter or their society in its entirety. The remaining principles revolve around moral obligations, honesty, respecting their parents, authority, wisdom, and knowledge. The authority is interesting in that they value their government as long as they can trust in it and how their government is performing. So their basis for their culture is less material and more intangible. In the Eastern cultures, there is more respect for the aging, and the elderly are held with honor in society and within their families. Now, the Western culture is a stark contrast to that Eastern culture in that it's focused on youthfulness, material items, and being more negative with aging. This is the culture that's moving forward technologically speaking, yet it's trying to maintain and not let go of youth. There is also that negative attitude about growing older, and it's thought and believed that people are happiest during their younger years. The Western culture is also a culture of denial about death. Death is a topic they avoid talking about. People are uncomfortable talking about it. They're trying to avoid it by maintaining their youth. There's differences and similarities, but some of the differences in the culture is in how the elderly are viewed are Koreans hold their elderly in higher regard than Americans, and the Korean elders have more say and control over money and decision-making within the family. Their Confucian beliefs about aging have higher self-esteem because the Confucian philosophy that the older the body, there is more assurance and credit than there is ridicule. The American culture is about maintaining that youthful appearance at all cost. And then there's the negative stereotypes about the aging, about how frail and weak, and that all older people have dementia. A similarity between the cultures is within the baby boomer generations. Koreans have a shorter span than the Americans, but their lifestyles are very similar. Both Korean and American are wealthier, have higher levels of education, have access to pensions, and both are more active than previous generations. Overall, in both cultures, though, and according to a study, there is a similarity in the anxiety of aging. Both women in both cultures, have higher anxiety than men in both cultures. American women have more anxiety about their looks. Korean women have more anxiety about psychological issues and fear of loss. Now, the men, on the other hand, when it comes to them, the Korean men had more anxiety than the American men. Now, comparing the cultures and their genders, American women had more than the American men, but the Koreans showed no difference between the genders when it came to the aging anxiety. One other similarity is in how the youth of the cultures view the elderly. And as time goes by, and in both cultures, the younger the generation, the more negative towards the aging. So in summary, the Korean culture still lives by those Confucian principles now, while the American culture is being driven by youthfulness. Now, while there's the similarities between those two cultures, there's still those differences that make them stand apart. The American and the Korean cultures are very different on their views of aging, but the one thing about the Korean culture, as it becomes more westernized, their culture is changing, and we're seeing it within the younger generations as they become more westernized. They're starting to view their older and elderly in a more negative light.